So I'm Nicole Armstrong. I'm the director for the water branch with Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development. I can't tell you how sorry I am that I'm not there in person. I was really like Gavin, really counting on being there this year, and recent changes made that impossible, and so really sad about that. But happy that there's this opportunity to present virtually with my colleagues that are there in person. So I'm going to talk about two key things today. I want to talk about our work to develop a new provincial water management strategy, and then I'm going to give an update on various water programs from across the provincial government. I'm going to talk today about work that's done within our group at Agriculture and Resource Development, but I'll also talk about work that's done on water from my colleagues in Manitoba Infrastructure, Conservation and Climate, and the Water Services Board. And these groups are also helping us to develop the provincial water management strategy. So the work I'm talking about today is truly a collaborative effort. I don't have a specific slide on COVID, but just to maybe pick up on Andrea and John's comments, certainly like North Dakota and Minnesota, we transitioned pretty quickly to a lot of electronic systems, to meeting virtually, things like that. Our field programs really continued uninterrupted through COVID, so that actually really was fairly streamlined. Perhaps the activity that was most impacted was engagement and connecting with people in person. And I think we've been trying hard to leverage many of our strong existing relationships that we've built over the years to get us through this tough time until we can meet in person again. But that's just kind of a quick summary of how we've been impacted by COVID. So I'm going to move on and talk about our work to develop a provincial water management strategy. So of course, water is a key resource for us in Manitoba. And our last comprehensive provincial water management strategy was developed in 2003. So that's, we're coming up on almost 20 years ago. So certainly we need an updated plan to ensure that we're managing this important resource strategically. Our department was assigned in March of 2020 to lead the development of a provincial water management strategy in cooperation with some of the other departments I mentioned. And we kicked off the work by asking our expert advisory council to provide us with some recommendations on the potential scope and elements of a water strategy. And we heard from them back in March of 2021, so coming up on almost a year ago, with some great advice for us. Armed with the advice from the Expert Advisory Council and our own work on water, we thought about some of the water management challenges and opportunities that face us. And this is just a quick list of some of the topics that'll be very familiar to folks in the room and online: issues with water quality and algal blooms, aquatic ecosystem health, and maintaining in-stream flows, water supply, something that of course is critically top of mind for all of us after the drought, managing extremes in moisture, particularly as we face increasing impacts from climate change, managing water infrastructure, both our built and gray infrastructure and our natural infrastructure, coordinating and cooperating across watersheds, so critical for us here, especially in Manitoba, where we receive so much of our water from upstream jurisdictions, working hard to share information and education with folks, and how can we do that better. And then using development of our water strategy as an important way to advance our efforts on reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and to engage Indigenous peoples. So those are some of the challenges and opportunities that face us on water management. So in response to the advice that we received from the Expert Advisory Council and our own work in government, we developed a draft framework for the water strategy that includes a vision, guiding principles, and key focus areas. And this document's available on our website, and I've included the web link here, and I'm sure we'll make these slides available after the presentation. But we also conducted some public engagement on this document last summer. And while that formal opportunity is over, the information, the framework, all remain on our website if folks are interested in more information. We also have a What We Heard document that summarizes the results from the engagement activities that we conducted. But I'll just give you a quick overview of the framework. So certainly for our strategy, we need a strong Made in Manitoba vision for our future water management in the province that sets a certain level of ambition for where we want to be. We want to use it to help communicate how water is valued in the province and how we intend to manage it. And so the draft statement is resilient, healthy waters that support thriving ecosystems, communities, and economies for generations. And in fact, in our engagement activities, about 83% or so of the participants thought that this statement included most or all of the components that they were looking for in a vision for water management. I'm going to move on and talk about the key focus areas. So these are really essentially overarching goals that we're proposing. They're at draft stage here, but focus areas that we would use to structure our water strategy. So anticipating actions that would fall out under each of these 11 key focus areas. And again, I know we're tight for time, so I'll move through these quickly, and they connect back with many of those challenges and opportunities that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. But things like enhancing water supply for sustainable development, making good use of water efficiency so that we're making every drop count, coordinating our water management, advancing Indigenous inclusion. My folks in groundwater appreciate number 5. Sometimes it's kind of out of sight, out of mind for groundwater, and so a specific focus area on understanding the supply and quality of water and its role here in Manitoba. We want to build our resilience to a variable and changing climate, address our water infrastructure challenges and opportunities, improve surface water quality, protect biodiversity and support aquatic ecosystem health, improve our information and knowledge management and for decision making, and engage Manitobans in water management. So a pretty ambitious list of goals that cover many of our major challenges and opportunities with respect to water management. So I mentioned engagement this summer, and certainly engagement is a critical part of developing our water strategy, and we have a three-pronged approach for this. There has been some periodic public engagement over the years, but most recently, just this past summer, through a platform in Manitoba called Engage Manitoba, we conducted public engagement. We recognize that development of the water strategy provides a really important opportunity for us to engage with Indigenous peoples and to move towards reconciliation. We're hoping to engage a third party to help us with Indigenous engagement and really hoping to start as soon as possible. This is one area where our efforts have certainly been impacted by COVID and an inability to get into communities. There are also some very significant specific stakeholders involved in water management. And again, we have a third party, the Enterprise Machine Intelligence and Learning Initiative, that's been provided with some funding to lead stakeholder engagement. And that's actually starting later this week, actually. So all of that feedback will help to inform our eventual water strategy. Again, stakeholder sessions happening later this winter, Indigenous engagement as well this winter and spring, and we're expecting to finalize a provincial water management strategy in the fall of 2022. So that's a very quick overview on the water strategy work. I'm going to move on to updates from my colleagues across the 4 departments that are involved in various aspects of water management. I'm not going to spend much time at all on this slide on drought. I know there's going to be a great session tomorrow, and Carly and Brian from Manitoba will be there talking in more detail about our work on drought and the impacts. But I wanted just to quickly summarize, of course, very hot and dry conditions, really record conditions impacting many sectors, including municipalities, agriculture. We developed, similar to North Dakota, some significant funding programs to support our ag producers, lots of work internally to share information and communicate. Support to municipalities, lots of phone calls and coordinating with folks like Pembina Valley Water Co-op. So really pulling together to try to help folks through the conditions that we're experiencing. So again, if you're interested in this topic, more at the session at 8:30 tomorrow. So I mentioned that water quality was one of the things that was impacted by the conditions, and in fact, really, in many ways, the hot conditions probably was what impacted water quality. There were some records broken here in Winnipeg. Normally, we have about 34 days a year above 30 degrees, or not normally. Normally, we have about 13 days above 30 degrees, and this past summer, we had 34 days above 30 degrees. Normally we have 1 day above 35 degrees and we had 5 days above 35 degrees. And those are stats that come from Canada's favorite climatologist, Dave Phillips, with Environment and Climate Change Canada. But warmer air temperatures means warmer water temperatures, just like the plants in my garden. We tend to see more algal blooms under those conditions. And in fact, we posted more advisory signs in 2021 than we had in any year in the past 20 years. Advisory signs let swimmers know that a bloom has been observed at that site in that season, and it's triggered when we see more than 100,000 cyanobacteria or blue-green algal cells in a sample. And if you're interested in more information, there's a link to our beach webpage with lots of content about our programming there. So of course, heat, one contributor to algal blooms. The other, of course, is excess concentrations of the plant nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus. And folks around the Red River Basin Commission table have heard me talk over the years about this topic and our work on nutrient reduction. So I'm just going to spend just a second on this one slide to again highlight some of the activities that are underway to reduce nutrient loading. In particular, we continue to work with wastewater treatment facilities to implement 1 milligram per liter phosphorus standard and 15 milligrams per liter nitrogen for many of our larger facilities. And we're looking forward to some of the efforts that Red River Basin Commission is leading and having folks come up to Manitoba and talk to our treatment operators about optimizing their wastewater treatment. So another important component there. We manage nutrient application to land through things like the 4R nutrient reduction program, right time, right place, right source, right rate. So some terrific incentive work there with farmers. Implement best management practices, retain wetlands, manage buffer strips. We've developed nutrient targets for Lake Winnipeg and its tributaries, and those will help to guide our nutrient reduction efforts going forward. And we regularly share information on nutrients in Lake Winnipeg, including through state of the lake reporting and information on nutrient loading. And again, there's a link to our website if folks are interested in more information. I want to move on and talk about one of our flagship programs. This is the Watershed Districts program, a really successful partnership between the province of Manitoba and municipalities across the province. We have 14 districts. They're established really on watershed-based boundaries. And you can see them there in blue. The gray areas are the municipal areas that are not participating at this time. Districts are established in legislation in Manitoba through the Watershed Districts Act and a regulation. They overall last year had about $12.6 million in funding to work with, just over $5 from the provincial government, some matching funding for municipalities, and about $5.4 million in external funding that districts were able to leverage. So a significant amount of money for districts to do a range of activities. The types of work that they do are here on this next slide. So they work on surface water management, water retention, erosion control, habitat conservation and enhancement, nutrient reduction and water quality efforts, drinking water protection, and then they help to conduct watershed awareness and education programs. And the numbers here just give you an example for 1 year, how they broke down their spending by activity. So lots of money on things like water retention structures, of course, and probably a little bit less on watershed education over the last couple of years with COVID. But just some terrific boots on the ground work that really makes a difference for us here in Manitoba on our water management efforts. We're really excited. The Watershed District program is expanding. We received about $350,000 additional dollars this year for expansion of the program, and the efforts are all focused in the Red River Watershed through the Pembina Valley Watershed District and the Red Boyne Watershed District. We have resolutions from a number of potential new municipal partners. We now need to formalize their inclusion through the Watershed Districts regulation, and we're expecting that work to be wrapped up by the end of March. So hopefully in April, some kind of an announcement on expanded Watershed Districts programming. Another important thing that the districts are involved in is integrated watershed management planning. This is a pretty formal process. It's outlined under our Water Protection Act, and the districts are actually designated as planning authorities under the Act. The Act sets out what the plans are to include, and it's things like compiling and communicating information on watersheds, bringing the watershed stakeholders together, and there's some specifics about making sure everyone's included. They work together to establish a watershed vision and goals, and then they develop a shared implementation plan. And that implementation plan guides the spending of the district in future years. So it's linked back to the funding that they have available. For the map that you can see, the areas in blue have existing plans. The orange areas are where we're developing second generation plans, and the green areas are where we have active plans in various stages of development. So much, again, of southern Manitoba and the area covered by districts have plans. And I can't talk about districts without talking about our Growing Outcomes in Watersheds program, which is a relatively new made in Manitoba approach for recognizing and helping to support producers as they maintain the different ecological goods and services across the province that help to build watershed resilience and improve water quality. This program provides about $5 million a year in incentive programming and capital programming for producers to do things that will actually improve watershed resilience and water quality. So again, it's things like retaining water, conserving and enhancing wetlands, helping with riparian management, all kinds of things, woodlot management, soil health improvement, all locally driven ideas by locals for the types of things that they want to do on the landscape. And this program is funded by, in part, by a fairly major endowment fund from the Manitoba government, about $200 million that funds GROW as well as our conservation trust. So funding that's going to exist really in theory forever for districts to do this work. So a really exciting program. We may be hearing more about this later in the conference from some of the districts. So a little change in tone here, aquatic invasive species. So some disappointing news here, an update from my colleagues. We did find zebra mussel veligers in Lake Manitoba. Not too surprising, likely given the proximity to Lake Winnipeg and the Red River, which are both invaded. We don't know the definite source, but certainly transfer from those is a possibility. It certainly highlights to us a need to continue to work with Manitobans on how they can prevent the spread and to ensure compliance with our AIS laws. And again, a website if you're interested in more information on this program. I want to move on and just talk quickly about some work from my colleagues from Conservation and Climate. They've recently, about 2 years ago now, amended our Water Rights Act and developed a streamlined approach for registering water control and drainage works that are lower risk, lower impact, a more significant licensing process for the higher risk, higher impact projects. This has allowed them to reduce the backlog from thousands of applications to, at most recent count, 38 applications for drainage work. So really allowed them to focus their efforts again on the higher risk, higher impact projects. I think 2 years ago at the conference, I was here presenting on this, already seems like a lifetime ago. The act changes also included compensation requirements for class 3 wetlands, so a protection for those wetlands that now, if you want to drain a class 3, you have to implement some compensation. They also implemented a new online water licensing portal at the same time. So some just terrific work from colleagues in Conservation and Climate. One of the activities that's licensed under the Water Rights Act is tile drainage, and certainly there continues to be an increase in the interest in tile drainage in recent years. Conservation and Climate and our department, Agriculture and Resource Development, are working together with folks interested in tile to look at how the new Drainage Regulation Act is working, how we might be able to further improve, enhance communication. So some work happening there. And just a quick shout out to the Red River Basin Commission with a thank you for all the work that you've done on tile drainage over the last few years, the bylaw for municipalities, that's been just terrific. And then the research that's happening on the US side is something that we're really interested here in Canada. So I'm getting close to the end here, folks. I want to give an update from my colleagues in Manitoba Infrastructure on some of their funding for major flood mitigation projects. These are funded through the Canada Infrastructure Program, the isit program we call it, some funding for 3 specific projects, and I'll move through these pretty quickly. Thanks to Chris Prop for this text. So a project here in the Emerson area. It includes construction of a new pump station, a lift station, a retention pond. It's at the detailed design stage and construction is expected to start in 2023. A similar project here funded by isit and St. Agath, this one specifically on dike raising to the 1 in 200 year flood protection level at the preliminary design stage, and again construction forecasted for 2023. Finally, St. Adolf isit project. This one's expected to start later this year. It's at the detailed design stage, and it includes a new pumping station, land drainage system upgrades, and dike raising as well. Also want to mention some work MI is doing in southeastern Manitoba. This is a multi-year study on the Roseau and Rat River watersheds, certainly areas that have experienced significant flooding in the past. They're looking at a capacity assessment for the provincial drains, looking at other drainage-related issues. They're doing some flood risk mapping and developing a hydrologic forecasting model. So some great work happening there in a multi-use study from MI. So thanks to them for sharing that information. And then I'm going to truly end here with just 2 slides on the Manitoba Water Services Board. I'm not sure this is something that we've talked with Red River Basin Commission about much before, but This is a Manitoba organization through our Central Services Department that's specifically set up to help municipalities to ensure that there's safe and sustainable water supplies available. They also help with wastewater infrastructure. They have an annual budget and they receive applications from municipalities for projects. They also leverage funding from Canada-Manitoba funding programs as well. They typically enter into some kind of a cost-sharing agreement with municipalities, but perhaps one of the other biggest things that they provide is engineering and technical and project management support for these projects, something that could be particularly important for municipalities that may not have these skills in-house. So just a quick snapshot on this last slide of some of the recent funding that's been provided for strategic infrastructure projects in the Red River Valley. Many of these are Pembina Valley Water Co-op projects, including upgrades to all of the Stephenfield, Morris, and Letellier water treatment plants, as well as some fairly new pipelines, in part to try to connect some communities to help with some of our drought mitigation. So all in all, about $8.5 million from the province for a total project cost of about $24 million. So some really great support and work here from our Manitoba Water Services Board. And that's my last slide. I'm going to end with one of my favorite, I think you guys can see this, one of my favorite comics about algae blooms and water quality challenges.